On my street, happiness lived on a scale from 1 to 5. I carried that scale on a clipboard, plastic smooth under my fingers. 5 little circles marching across every form, from very dissatisfied all the way up to very satisfied. Each circle waited like a tiny open mouth. My job was to walk Marlow Heights every week and ask people which mouth best described their lives. The company called me a neighborhood satisfaction officer. The residents called me Joel from the association when they were being polite, and Clipboard when they forgot I could hear them. That afternoon, the sky looked perfectly convincing, a solid blue with a white smear of plane exhaust stitched so straight across it that my first thought was templated. I shook the thought away. I'd been reading too many internal training modules. Templated was how they talked about yards and driveways and paint colours, not the sky. I started at the top of the cul-de-sac, the Lindquists' place, because their address sat at the top of my route sheet, and I respected the hierarchy of lists. Also because they were still ignoring the notice about the wind chimes, and the longer I stayed away, the more that unresolved item buzzed behind my eyes. They had 3 sets of chimes hanging from their porch. Glass rectangles, metal tubes, and a string of ceramic birds. The smallest ones rang with a thin, patient clink, like a spoon on the rim of a glass. The sound barely rose above the air, soft and harmless, but it still counted as non-standard. The association pamphlet allowed for seasonal door decor, non-sonic. That wording had come all the way from corporate. I'd been in the room when it arrived, printed on glossy paper. Someone at the table had asked what non-sonic meant, and my supervisor had smiled without moving any other part of his face and explained that it meant silent. Everyone at the table laughed as if that were a punchline. I knocked on the Lindquist's door and gave the porch camera a neutral expression. I knew where all the cameras were. A tiny red LED blinked above the doorbell in a slow, patient rhythm. The lens watched people approach and rated their visible emotions with something called the engagement engine. The training modules loved to talk about the engagement engine. They never mentioned what happened to the footage once it finished collecting numbers. Footsteps pattered on hardwood inside. The door opened a crack, chain still on. "Joel." Mrs. Lindquist's eye appeared in the gap. "Is this about the chimes again? I've got your quarterly survey." I lifted the clipboard like a shield. "Any other items we can cover at the end." The chain slid back. She opened the door wide enough that the smell of whatever she was baking, cinnamon, butter, something trying its best to be comforting, washed over me. "You people and your surveys. I already told you the chimes are staying." Her hair was twisted into a messy knot, pins shining like bits of foil. Behind her, the house looked like one of the catalogue spreads in the association's welcome packet. Grey walls, white trim, a sideboard with a vessel sink resting on it like an art object. Bare toes and faint crayon marks low along the hallway broke the illusion, details that never showed up in the packets. "I'm just collecting responses," I reminded both of us. "I don't decide enforcement." "That's what you always say." It was. I went through the script anyway, the way you recite multiplication tables or hymns. "On a scale from 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with your overall quality of life in Marlow Heights?" She rolled her eyes but looked at the sheet. Her fingers brushed the paper, and for a second, the circles seemed to flex, like they were breathing. 4, she muttered. "Fine, 4. I marked the circle. "What would it take to move your rating from a 4 to a 5 in the next quarter?" "That's the question you ask when you want to sell me something." "It's the question on the form." She chewed her lip, thinking. That part was always real. People used the question to imagine a different set of numbers for their lives. "I'd like to hang wind chimes without a stranger with a clipboard stalking my porch," she said. "There, that's my answer." I wrote, "Desires more freedom of porch decor without compliance visits." My handwriting stayed neutral. I never wrote anything snide, even when residents snapped at me. The forms didn't care who was right. They cared about language. We moved through the rest: noise levels, property upkeep, neighbors. She chose mostly 4s. At the bottom, at the comment box, she paused. "Do you read these?" She tapped the lines. "Or do they go into that big black hole with everything else?" I read them. I have to summarize any open feedback for my reports. And then? Then someone higher up reads my summary. I didn't let myself think much past that. She made a sound in her throat that might have been a laugh. "Come back when you can do more than write things down, Joel." She closed the door before I could tell her I wished that too. The chimes stirred when the door latched, glass rectangles touching with clear, thin notes. The sound ran up my spine like fingers. I walked back down her front path, past her perfect lawn. Every blade of grass in Marlow Heights stood at the same height. We weren't supposed to say identical. The association preferred consistently maintained. Mr. Patterson across the way pretended not to watch from his garage, framed by 2 cars that looked like they came from the same brochure. I made a mental note to check his file later. He kept his trash barrels out longer than the guidelines allowed. The route sheet guided me house by house. Ring, smile, recite, record. I knew which kitchens smelled like coffee and which like bleach. I knew whose eyes jerked toward their property line whenever we mentioned community standards. We were a neighborhood owned by a subsidiary of a company whose full name wouldn't stay in my head. The version on my badge read, in neat block letters, Marlow Heights Residential Solutions, a division of Hyperia Living. My job description in the portal said I helped close the loop between lived experience and enterprise metrics. I walked the loop every week. Closing it lived on another salary level. By the time I finished the last survey, the sun was sliding down behind the matching roofs. The cul-de-sac sat at the far end of the neighborhood like an exclamation point. My townhome occupied the base of the exclamation mark. Across from me, Mrs. Hawkins knelt on her lawn with a pair of scissors, trimming any blade of grass that dared creep over the concrete line. I lifted a hand. She gave me a tired smile. The sky over the cul-de-sac looked more saturated than in the morning. A little too blue, like the default background on a new TV. I turned toward my door, keys in one hand, clipboard in the other. The sky went out. 1 second, the gradient of orange and blue glowed over the roofs. The next, the world wore a shifting skin of grey, alive with tiny specks writhing against each other. Old TV static stretched across the entire dome above us. The air tightened. My own breath sounded loud and ragged because nothing else made a sound. Sprinklers stayed silent. The usual rush of cars on the arterial road beyond our walls vanished. Even the faint airplane hum disappeared. Movement across the street caught my eye. Mr. Patterson stood in his driveway, hand up, mid-wave. That was how he always greeted me when we passed. A chin-jut, a single lift of the fingers, his version of friendly. Only now his hand hovered halfway up, fingers splayed, his face turned toward me. He didn't blink. I tried to speak. The noise felt like it got lost between my mouth and my ears. I took a step toward him. Each footfall landed heavy, as if the pavement had thickened. "Mr. Patterson?" My voice came out dull, muffled, like my ears and mouth had fallen out of sync. He stayed exactly as he was, wave frozen, eyes fixed on me. His chest didn't move. The static sky crawled overhead. I forced myself to look away from it and back to him. My clipboard dug into my palm. I walked closer until his car's polished flank reflected both of us. That's where I finally caught the loop. It took a long stare. The human brain expects movement, not repetition. But after a moment of focus, I saw it. Every few seconds, his hand slipped downward a centimeter, then snapped back to the exact same position. His pupils shifted a fraction, then jumped back to staring straight at me. Okay, this is new. Stroke, heart attack, seizure. Every emergency possibility jostled in my head. His skin looked healthy, his jaw loose. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the harsh lemon of the wipes he used on his dashboard. I reached for his shoulder. The body usually gives you something when you touch another person. Warmth, the faint give of muscle, the subtle adjustment of a living system. I braced for that. My hand met something that felt like glass, rubber, and air at the same time. The contact didn't land like real resistance. It felt as though I had reached for a picture of a person instead of the person themselves. Every instinct screamed at me to yank my hand back. Another part pushed me to shove harder, punch through, prove he was still solid. I went with yanking. Pins and needles shot up into my wrist. He blinked. His hand dropped smoothly to his side, his chest filled with a breath. He tilted his head, as if he'd just noticed me. "Evening, Joel." The words sounded like his usual rumble, but they lagged a fraction of a beat behind his lips. His mouth moved, then the sound arrived and tried to catch up. "The neighborhood doing okay?" He adjusted his ball cap, eyes already sliding toward my clipboard. Static prickled the back of my neck. I looked up. The sky had started to patch itself. Grey gave way to slabs of blue, like someone dragging a repair tool across the pixels. "Fine," I managed. "We're at a 4. He let out a small laugh. "Always room for improvement, huh?" He turned back toward his garage. The first few steps looked ordinary. Then the pattern slipped in. Right foot, left, right, left, never quite syncing with the faint sound of his shoes. Every 4 steps his body stuttered, then popped back to a previous position, as if he walked down invisible stairs that only existed every other second. "Have a good one," he tossed over his shoulder. By the time the words reached my ears, he was already halfway into the shadows. The air woke up in a rush. A sprinkler somewhere chattered to life. A dog barked down the block. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a push notification from the association app. "Service alert. Minor temporal disturbance. All systems stable. No action required." I fumbled my phone out. The screen looked normal. The alert vanished before I could tap it. I turned slowly in the middle of the cul-de-sac, searching for anything else broken. A breeze touched my face. Clouds, real ones, with soft edges and no hint of static, had returned. For a moment I convinced myself I'd misread everything. Pressure shifts happen. People freeze when they're about to faint. Brains misinterpret. I could log it as a perceived anomaly, send it up in my weekly report, and forget. Then I saw the men at the horizon. They stood at the far end of the street, just beyond the carefully curved landscaping of the cul-de-sac's throat. At first they looked like shadows where no shadows should fall, smudges against the bright afternoon. Then their legs picked up, and they walked. 4 of them, matching dark suits that hung flawlessly from their shoulders, fabric untouched by wind. Black shoes that touched the pavement without sound. White ovals where faces should be. Blank planes that caught the light in a dull sheen. No features, no indentations. The static at the horizon thickened under their feet. My knees wanted to lock. Years of training and habit pushed me forward instead. Corporate auditors, mystery shoppers, some new program they hadn't bothered to mention. My job description said I interfaced with residents and external stakeholders. I squared my shoulders and stepped off my porch to meet them. They didn't look at me. They walked in a straight line down the street, a narrow file splitting around parked cars without breaking rhythm. As they passed Mrs. Hawkins's house, she straightened from her lawn, scissors still in hand, and watched them. Her mouth formed a small O. I caught her eye and lifted my clipboard like a question. She shook her head once, barely, and moved back toward her door. The first blank-suited figure stopped at the Lindquists' driveway. He didn't step onto the property. He halted at the exact line where the concrete changed shade, where the association's responsibility ended and the residence began. The boundary we wrote into the guidelines, invisible but enforced. He opened a folder. The motion looked clean and mechanical. like a stock video of hands opening paper. The sleeves ended in smooth white, yet the folder turned as if invisible fingers gripped it under the skin. The other three continued down the street toward other houses. I walked closer until I could see inside the open folder. Standard Association complaint form, house address printed at the top. Below, familiar boxes for issue type, severity, date of occurrence. Someone had filled the comment field in a tight, controlled hand. Unapproved audible decor, negative impact on perceived tranquility scores, multiple prior contacts, escalation recommended. My heart pushed hard against my ribs. The handwriting matched mine. Not just similar, identical. The same slight right lean on my R, the same rounding of my E's. I stared at the loops, scrambling for excuses. Photocopy, forgery, template that happened to mimic my style. Behind me, the Lindquists' front door scraped open. I spun. Mrs. Lindquist walked out with her eyes closed. Her lids rested loosely on her cheeks, neither squeezed nor scrunched, as if she dreamed her way through each step. Her feet navigated the 3 porch steps without hesitation. Her hand reached for the hook where the glass chimes hung and unlatched it. The chimes clinked weakly in her grasp. She gathered the metal set and the ceramic birds too. Mrs. Lindquist. I took a step up the walkway. Hey, are you... She passed within arm's reach. Her skin held the waxy tone of someone under sedation. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She laid the chimes in a neat row on the porch railing, evenly spaced. Then she turned, walked back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked. My breath sounded too loud. I faced the faceless man again. He still stood on the property line, folder open, motionless. No head tilt, no sign he'd ever registered me. Movement inside the house drew my eye. Through the kitchen window, where I'd leaned before during a previous survey, listening to her rummage in the fridge, Mrs. Lindquist stood shoulder to shoulder with her husband, both of them looking out. Their eyes stayed open. Their bodies followed a strange timing. Heads turned, then eyes followed half a beat later. When Mrs. Lindquist raised a hand, fingers curled around empty air, her gaze remained straight ahead, then snapped sideways to catch up. Every few seconds their posture reset, shoulders settling back, chins leveling, faces smoothing into identical mild contentment. A faint high tone whined in my ears. I looked back at the form in the folder, still hovering in the grip of nothing hands. My own old notes stared back. Third notice for chimes, resident argumentative, unwilling to compromise. I didn't... The sound barely left my throat. That isn't what I meant. The blank oval shifted toward me, a small angle of attention. Who are you with? My voice climbed. Corporate? No response. I'm the satisfaction officer assigned to this route. The familiar script gave me something to stand on. You can't enact corrective measures without notification. There's procedure. Nothing. The static on the horizon pulsed. Panic spiked, and I did the stupid thing. I reached out and grabbed its sleeve. My fingers brushed cloth, crisp, cool. Then they slid through. It felt like thrusting my hand into the space between radio stations, the hiss that isn't empty so much as overloaded with nothing in particular. Temperature vanished. My bones vibrated, hollow and buzzing. I yanked back. My hand popped free, like pulling a suction cup off glass. Numbness spread from wrist to fingertip. I stared, half expecting frostbite or burns. The skin looked normal, maybe a shade paler. My fingers felt distant, like I controlled them over a laggy connection. When I flexed, they bent on command, slow and wrong. The faceless man hadn't moved. I stumbled back down the walkway, heart banging hard. No one else on the street reacted. The other blank-suited figures stood at other property lines. Doors opened. Bodies moved inside houses. No one cried out. The static sky thinned, shedding density in patches. Blue pushed through. Sun heat returned, bland and familiar. My phone vibrated again. Service update. All temporal disturbances resolved. Thank you for your patience. I stared at the notification until it faded. When I finally made it inside my townhome, I locked the door, then immediately felt foolish for locking the door. On autopilot, I walked to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink threw my face back at me. Dark hair flattened in front from where I ran my hand through it too much. Association polo, badge clipped neat, eyes probably more bloodshot than the branding guidelines preferred. I lifted my numb hand to the glass. "I'm fine," I told my reflection. "This is fine. You had a stress episode. You've been working too many extra routes." I moved my hand side to side. My reflection lagged for a fraction of a beat, then followed. The routine I knew down to muscle memory fractured. When I turned my head fast, the mirror version took an extra instant to catch up. I stood there a long time, breathing shallow and quick, until the overhead light built itself into a migraine. I did what I always did when something in the neighborhood didn't match any category on my forms. I wrote it down. In the morning, the sky had the decency to look normal. Blue, with early streaks of pink along the edges, the kind of sky developers use in their renderings of future properties. I watched it out my bedroom window for 5 full minutes, searching for crawling pixels. Nothing. My fingers still buzzed with numbness. Buttoning my shirt turned into a clumsy operation. The association polo went over a fresh undershirt, same as always. I clipped on my name badge, Joel Morgan Satisfaction Officer. The ritual calmed a tight place in my chest. People relied on me to show up, ask how satisfied they were, and transcribe the answer. Reality might be glitching, but I still had a job. A soft thump sounded at the front door. Mail. I wasn't expecting a delivery. Bills and official notices came through the association app, unless the company specifically wanted the weight of paper. I walked down, every step half a beat behind my intention. When I opened the door, the morning air tasted sharp. A stack of forms sat on my welcome mat. Association cardstock clipped with a black binder clip. On top, a cover sheet with the Hyperia Living logo. A stylized house wrapped in a soft gradient arc. Route Supplement Marlow Heights Pilot Program. Underneath, someone had written my name. The letters matched the ones on my badge and looked disturbingly like my own handwriting, only neater. I brought the stack inside. Coffee first. Then I cleared the kitchen table and spread them out. These weren't blank surveys. Each form already carried an address at the top and completed complaint fields. 12 Juniper Bend. Cluttered porch decor lowering visual standards. Prior coaching ignored. Neighbor reported emotional discomfort. 8 Willow Loop. Frequent late-night gatherings. Elevated noise metrics beyond agreed decibel cap. 54 Marigold Court. Non-conforming garden arrangement. Unauthorized plant species. Address after address. Every entry followed the template I used every day. Same phrasing, same mildness, the same small judgments tucked inside neutral language. I could have written them. I had written most of them. I just didn't remember putting these specific ones on paper. Someone had mined my weekly reports and reconstituted them into a new stack, tagged for escalation. At the back of the pile waited a memo on glossy paper. To Field Asset Satisfaction, Joel Morgan. From Neighborhood Optimization Team. Subject, Updated Responsibilities, External Auditing Integration, I read. Thank you for your continued excellence in satisfaction collection. Your route has been selected as a pilot environment for the External Auditing Entities, EAEs program. EAEs work in partnership with on-site satisfaction officers to enact real-time corrective measures, ensuring that resident experience remains above standard. As a trusted member of the Marlow Heights community, your participation helps us pioneer the future of reality-adaptive living. Please continue to collect feedback as usual. EAEs will handle enforcement of persistent non-compliance based on your existing records. No additional action required at this time. I stared at the phrase reality adaptive until the letters blurred. The last page listed my own address, 29 Cypress Court. Under resident name, the line read Joel Morgan. The complaint field stayed empty. One note in the margin, in that too perfect version of my handwriting. Pending evaluation. A knock jerked my attention to the front window. 4 short raps, impatient. Mrs. Hawkins stood on my porch, half-turned, scanning the street like she didn't want to be seen. Hair escaped her usual neat clip, strands sticking out. One hand wrapped tight around the other wrist. I opened the door before she knocked again. She jumped, then forced on a smile. "Joel, you're home. Good. I need you to look at something." Her eyes rarely held still on normal days. That morning they bounced from my face to the stack of forms on the table and back to the street. "Sure." I stepped aside. "Is everything okay? Does it look okay?" She stepped in and shut the door harder than necessary. "My husband walked through a door last night." She pinned me with a look that knocked the employee voice right out of me. "Through the door," I managed. "The back one. He came home late from work, right? I heard his car, the gate, all of it. I was in the kitchen. The door was closed, Joel. Locked." Her hands carved the air. "He just kept walking. Didn't stop, didn't reach for the knob. He went straight through it, like smoke." My first reflex lined up the usual explanations. Alcohol, misperception, a bad dream. I bit my tongue. She wasn't asking for the company version. "I started yelling," she went on. "You would have too. He turned around like nothing happened, like he hadn't just done something impossible, and then he..." She faltered. "He said your name. He looked at me with..." She shut her eyes, opened them again, angry at whatever replayed there. With his normal face, only nothing behind it, like a screensaver. And he said, "Joel tells us you've been so helpful. Joel tells us this household is above standard." My name, wrapped in association phrasing. "That isn't..." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Mrs. Hawkins, You're the satisfaction guy. They tell us you're the one we go to. If there's a problem, we talk to Joel. If we're doing well, we tell Joel. If we want anything, we ask Joel. That's what those stupid welcome videos say." Her voice climbed. "So you tell me what this is." She grabbed my wrist. Her fingers dug into the skin above my watch. "Because when I couldn't stop yelling, he came over and started petting my hair like I'm some therapy dog. You know he doesn't do that. He's not gentle like that. But he just kept doing it over and over every 30 seconds. I counted. I begged him to stop and he kept going. Even when I went to the bedroom and shut the door, his hand just kept..." A shudder tore through her. "He reset to it. Like a loop. Like something you programmed." The room tilted. I pictured her living room, her husband in his pressed work shirt, arm reaching out on a schedule the way our sprinklers did. "I didn't program anything. I log feedback. I don't assign interventions." "Then who does?" Her grip tightened. "Because I saw those men, Joel. Those things, with no faces. I saw them standing outside the Carver's house. The Carver's kids haven't been outside all day. And now my husband keeps saying your name like a prayer. And I can't sleep, because every time I close my eyes, I see him walking through the door again." Her voice dropped to a rasp. "You have to fix it. This is your program. You're the one with the forms. Fix it." The worst part was how precisely she'd hit the one part she could be right about. This was my program. My complaints, my surveys, my tidy notes about non-compliance and opportunities for improvement fed whatever algorithm decided who got visited by a faceless man with a folder. The memo had made that clear without intending to. EAEs handled enforcement of persistent non-compliance based on my records. I'd believed there was a human somewhere between my notes and enforcement. A manager, a committee, legal, something. The stack of forms on my table looked like a pile of loaded weapons. "I'll talk to corporate," I told her. The words sounded empty as they left my mouth. The association's local office sat at the mouth of the neighborhood, right by the ornamental stone sign that announced Marlow Heights in tasteful steel letters. The building was a flat-roofed rectangle with a glass front that reflected the same 3 cars in the parking lot, no matter when you came. Inside, the air smelled like printer toner and citrus cleaning solution. The receptionist at the front counter wore the association's pale blue blouse. Her nameplate read Kim in neat block letters. She smiled as I walked in, the same smile I'd seen 3 times a week for 2 years. "Welcome to Marlow Heights Residential Solutions. How can we assist you in achieving an above-standard day?" Her voice landed with a faint echo, as if someone had recorded it and was playing it back half a second behind her lips. "Hey, Kim." I set my clipboard on the counter to give my hands something to do. "Is Tully in? I need to discuss the pilot program memo." We're always happy to discuss exciting new pilot programs. Her fingers tapped a few keys that didn't seem connected to anything. "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Her eyes tracked my movement 3 beats behind my steps, like video footage lagging behind real time. I sank into one of the lobby chairs. The TV on the wall above the magazine rack played the association's welcome loop, smiling families, kitchen islands, a voiceover promising seamless living experiences and frictionless community enforcement. The footage stuttered once, then smoothed. A door at the back opened. Tully emerged, tie already loosened even though it was barely 9. "Joel, my man!" He clapped my shoulder as I stood. His palm ran hot, like it had rested over a laptop vent. "Come on back." His office smelled like coffee and synthetic vanilla. The blinds behind his desk were half closed, slats striping a framed Hyperia Living logo. "What's on your mind?" He dropped into his chair. The casters rolled just enough to center him in the stripes. I stayed standing for a heartbeat, then sat. "We had an event yesterday, on Cypress Court. You and everyone else in the pilot." He steepled his fingers. "Temporal disturbances can feel disorienting during initialization. That's in the training deck. You went through the deck." I went through the deck. The deck mentioned minor perceptual anomalies. It didn't cover residents freezing on their lawns or external auditing entities appearing with my reports in their hands. He made a dismissive gesture. "EAAEs are part of the enhanced standardization experience. You're lucky, Joel. Do you know how many neighborhoods would kill to be on the front line of innovation? We aren't a beta test." Heat pushed into my voice. "These are people's houses, their lives. That's why this is the perfect environment." He leaned forward. His eyes glinted with something that might have been excitement or reflected graphics from his monitor. "Our customers deserve the most consistent, optimized experiences possible. EAEs help us close the loop faster. Friction drops, satisfaction scores rise. You've seen the graphs." He woke his computer with a tap. I hadn't noticed the monitor before. You spend enough time around forms and screens and they fade into the background of the job. On his display, a dashboard sprawled across multiple panes. Charts, numbers, color-coded heat maps. One segment filled most of it. MHX-17, Marlow Heights Adaptive Environment. He clicked through tabs. Heat maps shifted into line graphs, then into a list of non-compliance clusters. Next to each address sat a small icon, green, yellow, or red. Some carried an extra symbol, a small, faceless silhouette. "What does that icon mean?" I pointed. "Confirmation that EAEs have engaged." His tone framed it like a checkmark next to a completed task. "Isn't it beautiful?" Beautiful wasn't my word of choice. "You know about Mr. Patterson on Cypress?" I pushed. He froze. The sky turned to static. Mrs. Lindquist walked out and took down her chimes like something was controlling her. That goes beyond a minor temporal disturbance. "Joel." His voice slid into the performance review register it used when he wanted to sound caring. "I understand change can be unsettling. But the important thing is metrics. Residents might feel discomfort in the short term. Long term, our data shows consistent improvements in reported satisfaction. If they're reporting anything at all, they will. His smile smoothed back into place. Once the transition period ends, nobody will remember how much noise there was before. That's the beauty of reality-adaptive frameworks. We align perception with standards. Align perception, I echoed. Exactly. Do you know what EAEs look like? I leaned forward. Have you ever actually seen one, Tully? He shrugged. They're an abstraction, an interface, a way for the environment to express corrective functions. They don't have to look like anything in particular. They wear suits and have no faces. They stand at property lines with folders full of my handwriting. That feels particular. A small crease formed between his brows, then smoothed. Look, Joel, you're doing excellent work. That's why they gave you the pilot. You log complaints, the system identifies patterns, EAEs optimize. Just keep running your route. Let the environment handle enforcement. And if residents get hurt? Above my pay grade. His hands lifted. And yours. We're field assets. We feed the engine. I stood. The room shivered around the edges. Is there any way to turn them off? The plea slipped out despite my best attempt at professionalism. To pause the program? Mrs. Hawkins's husband. Tully's gaze flicked over my shoulder. For a second, static patterns reflected in his pupils. Go home, he murmured. Stick to your route. Don't interact with EAEs beyond your role description. Let the system settle. Everything else will sort itself out. The conversation had hit its boundary. On my way out, I glanced down the hallway I'd never been allowed in. The door there stood open a crack. Through it I glimpsed racks of black equipment with tiny LEDs blinking in slow unison. Screens on the far wall showed camera feeds from impossible angles, fisheye shots of kitchens, overhead views of cul-de-sacs from nowhere any drone could sit. At the desk, Kim repeated her greeting to the empty air as I passed. Welcome to Marlow Heights Residential Solutions. How can we assist you in achieving an above-standard day? No one stood there to answer. That afternoon I tried to leave. Not Marlow Heights permanently. The association liked us to feel integrated with the outside world. We were expected to run errands, commute to jobs elsewhere, eat at not-approved restaurants once in a while. Controlled environments behave better when they didn't feel like cages. I just wanted a drive. Air that belonged to a sky I hadn't seen crawl. I got in my car, clipped my badge to the visor, and pulled out. The main road passed the association office, then dipped under the stone Marlow Heights sign. For 100 yards it was only trees and the smooth curve of asphalt. Then the commercial strip appeared. Coffee chain, pharmacy, gas station, nail salon, all in the same beige block the company had built alongside the houses. I turned left at the light, onto the arterial. 10 minutes later, the coffee shop slid past my passenger window again. Same cars in the same slots. Same man leaning under the no smoking sign, hand shading his eyes. The gas station sign blinked the same letters. I checked my mirrors. The road behind receded like any normal road. Ahead, the next intersection glowed green. I kept driving. The GPS on my dash spun, then thrust the little car icon onto a differently named road. The label changed from Pinecrest Boulevard to Marlow Heights Access Road. The view out the windshield stayed exactly the same. Beige strip mall, gas station, nail salon. Construction detour, I muttered. Map's wrong. I pressed my foot down. The engine roared. The speedometer climbed. The scenery held its position. The horizon fuzzed. Color washed out ahead of me, replaced by a curtain of static that hung over the far end of the street. Trees warped as they touched it, trunks bending, leaves dissolving into grey noise. My foot eased off the gas on its own. The car slowed. The GPS finally gave up. The map rotated once and collapsed into a blank grey field with only the little car icon floating in the middle. I tried to pull over, but the road offered no shoulder. Asphalt spread smooth and undivided to either side without gravel or curb. Sweat collected behind my knees. My chest stuttered. I shifted into reverse. The wheel in my hands felt like a prop. The engine whined as the car rolled backward. The static band at the horizon pulled away. After an awkward stretch of driving backward, I managed to turn around and point the hood back toward the neighborhood. This time, the world rearranged. For half a minute, I believed I'd escaped. Empty fields appeared with signs for future Hyperia marketplace sites. A row of unfamiliar townhomes slid past. Then the stone Marlow Heights sign rose ahead. I pulled into the neighborhood. My phone pinged when I crossed the threshold. "Welcome home, Joel." I sat in my driveway for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. When I finally got out, the neighborhood greeted me as if nothing had happened. Kids rode bikes on the side street. The Carver's sprinklers arced across their lawn in clean lines. Under the ordinary noise, a static hum remained, like a sound just beyond hearing. That night I turned off all the bathroom lights and stood in front of the mirror with only my phone's flashlight on. The white beam carved my face into sharp planes. Every pore, every crease, punished by the brightness. I lifted my hand. The man in the glass held still for a full second before moving. The lag landed harder in the dark. Something fundamental broke when your own body stopped following your intentions in real time. I waved once, twice, fast. The reflection tried to keep up, trailing by a fraction of a second like a buffered video. I leaned close until my breath fogged the glass. My pupils looked huge. "Who are you optimizing this for?" I whispered. The mirror stayed mute. The longer I stared, the more my own face turned strange, feature by feature. I needed leverage, something the system valued more than my confusion. I had one asset the faceless men didn't. I had the forms. The next morning, my kitchen table became a war room. I spread the new escalation forms into a grid and slid old weekly reports between them. Address by address, I matched complaints to outcomes. The Carvers, multiple notes about frequent visitors creating parking challenges. Now their driveway presented as permanently empty from the street, even on days I had watched their cars pull in. Some kind of sightline optimization. The Munoz family, flagged for non-conforming paint samples visible on exterior wall. Their house now wore a standard palette color that felt slightly off, like the hex code had been rounded to a more efficient value. The Lindquists, wind chimes, argumentative, their window loops and tracking eyes told that story without paper. The pattern came into focus. Every petty irritation I'd written down, every small annoyance a neighbor had shared with me as conduit, had become raw material for reality edits. A line item on a ledger justifying adjustments. I'd always framed it as service. People complain either way, I'd told myself. At least this way, someone hears them. At least this way, problems get solved. The new solutions looked a lot like the inside of a tranquilized dream. My gaze landed on Mrs. Hawkins's address, already circled on one of the new forms. Spouse hours inconsistent with stated schedule. Night arrival noise reported. Emotional tone variance. Neighbors loved to comment on each other's marriages when you gave them neat boxes. I grabbed a pen. If my complaints helped shape enforcement, maybe new complaints, or their opposites, could redirect it. The system had trained me in its language. It hadn't accounted for the possibility that I might try speaking comfort in that same vocabulary. I pulled a fresh form from the bottom of the stack. The paper felt warmer than the others, as if it had been waiting. At the top, under resident name, I wrote Hawkins Household Exemplary. Under issue type, I wrote none. In the comment box, I let the words flow. Resident demonstrates high engagement with property upkeep. Household displays resilience and adaptive coping strategies under stress. Noise levels remain within acceptable variance. Emotional expression adds richness to the environment and should be preserved. I filled one out for the Lindquists. Wind chimes contribute positively to perceived tranquility. Auditory variety supports community vibrancy goals. Recommend reclassification as approved decor. For every house I knew the men had touched, I wrote protective language into the margins. I cancelled my earlier complaints with praise and reframed their quirks as assets. By the time I finished, my hand burned. The numbness from grabbing the faceless sleeve lingered, but my fingers moved with an uncanny smoothness. The letters came out even, too perfect, corporate perfect. I stacked the forms and walked them over to the association office's overnight Dropbox. The slot accepted them without comment. Pilot feedback, I muttered to the locked door. Adjust to this. That evening I sat on my porch with a lukewarm beer and waited. The sky stayed blue. Clouds drifted lazily. A couple walked their dog past my driveway, giving me the small nod that meant, "We approve of your lawn." I almost convinced myself nothing would happen. Then the temperature dipped. A faint smell of overheated electronics slipped down the street. The static line appeared where the cul-de-sac met the main loop. 4 faceless men stepped out of it. This time they didn't fan out across every house. Their paths narrowed, angling only toward the addresses I'd rewritten. The Lindquists, the Hawkins, 2 others down the block. They stopped at the same property lines as before. Folders open. "Come on," I breathed. "Read it. No escalation. Stand down." The one at the Lindquists' driveway adjusted its folder, turning a page. No door opened. No sleepwalking resident appeared on the porch. Through the kitchen window, 2 silhouettes moved in normal rhythm. The Lindquists talked, gestures loose. A laugh floated out, warm and unforced. The faceless man waited. At the Hawkins, no static poured from the windows. Her husband leaned on the porch railing, hair mussed, tie crooked. He checked his watch, yawned. Mrs. Hawkins sat on the step below him, resting her head against his leg. His fingers drifted through her hair once, absent and soft, then moved away. No loop. The forms had changed the script, at least in that small way. The system had registered my new labels. The faceless men stayed in place as if bound to some invisible timer. After 11 seconds, they closed their folders in unison. The clap sounded like a sound effect dragged and dropped the same way across 4 tracks. They turned and walked back toward the static band. The air warmed. The smell of electronics thinned. I let my breath out slowly. Across the street, Mrs. Hawkins's husband eventually retreated inside. She stayed on the step, staring at nothing, fingers twitching on her knees. I had shielded her from one flavor of reformatting. I hadn't erased the night her husband walked through the door or the memory of his hand resetting on her hair. On the page, I'd recorded them as stable, exemplary, above standard. You don't heal people by reducing them to entries. You just change what the entries demand. The rush from the protection forms didn't last. By the next week, new seams started to show. Backyard fences lost their imperfections. Knots and hairline cracks smoothed into repeating patterns, the way textures tile in a video game. Birds perched on power lines, but when I blinked, they shifted to different positions without moving their wings, like one stock photo swapping for another. Residents repeated themselves, not in the usual way, where someone tells the same story twice a year apart, in the same day, the same hour. I knocked on the Munoz door one morning. "Quarterly survey," I announced. Mrs. Munoz smiled, tucking hair behind her ear. "Of course, Joel. Come in." We went through the questions: overall satisfaction, property value perception, noise levels. She filled in mostly 4s. An hour later, because of a typo on my route sheet, I ended up back at her door. I realized too late and knocked anyway. half hoping she wouldn't answer. The door swung open. "Quarterly survey," I blurted. Her smile snapped into place. "Of course, Joel, come in." We moved through the exact same questions, in the exact same order. She gave the exact same answers. The pen in my hand moved before my brain caught up. My questions traced the same words I'd written an hour earlier. I watched the ink lay down letters that matched the first set stroke for stroke. When I compared the forms, the handwriting lined up as if someone had traced one over the other. She didn't notice anything odd. Why should she? The environment had already decided her responses. It took me 3 days after that to walk back into the association office at night. Kim's station stood empty, the little bowl of branded pens untouched. The interior lights hummed low. The back hallway door was locked, but my badge, field access, nothing special, turned the indicator green. I stepped into the server room. The temperature felt colder, the way machinery cools itself, but the chill held a different edge. The air seemed to pull heat out of me. Racks of black units towered on either side, LEDs blinking in patterns just erratic enough to mimic language. Cables ran into the ceiling. On one wall, a row of screens glowed. Each displayed Marlow Heights from some impossible angle. A top-down view of my cul-de-sac from high above. A wireframe render of the neighborhood hovering in a grid. An inside-out view from within a wall, looking through drywall and studs into a kitchen I recognized as the Carver's. A workstation sat beneath the screens, mouse-centered, keyboard angled as if someone had just been there. The monitor waited on a login prompt. We'd been told 100 times, field staff didn't need access beyond the satisfaction portal. Everything else stayed with optimization. Do not attempt to access internal frameworks. Violations result in corrective coaching. The faceless men had already walked past every line in those guidelines. One minor infraction felt fair. I typed in my badge ID and password. A progress bar crawled across the screen, then a dashboard bloomed into view. MHX-17, Marlow Heights Reality Adaptive Customer Environment. Down the side, metrics, satisfaction index, variance levels, compliance rate, perception alignment. A list of roles scrolled in another column. Reconciling their names took a second. Field Asset, Satisfaction, Joel Morgan. Field Asset Enforcement, EAEs. Oversight Node, Regional. Customer Node, Undeclared. The last entry flickered between undeclared and non-human so quickly I wasn't sure I'd actually seen the second word. I clicked my own name. A profile popped up. Field Asset Satisfaction. Name, Joel Morgan. Status, active. Performance, above standard. Adaptation, in progress. Influence weight, 0.87. Below the system listed my weekly reports. Links opened each one. At a glance, they looked bland and serviceable. When I zoomed in, a side panel broke them into derived metrics. Complaint lexical tone, anomaly sensitivity, loyalty index. The system had been rating my word choices and my level of concern. At the bottom of the page, a line glowed in neon green, eligible for role expansion. A blank field pulsed under the label, Feedback, Concerns. A small note beside it read, "Your input helps us improve your environment. Tell us how we're doing." My teeth ground together. I began typing. The company is violating its own guidelines. EAEs are enacting reality changes without informed consent and causing measurable distress. Residents report fear, confusion, and loss of autonomy. The environment no longer matches stated values. Corrective action required. I hit submit. The dashboard froze, then blinked. Charts vanished, replaced for a moment by uniform grey. Lines reappeared in a different arrangement. A new metric came into existence, collector variance. Beside my name, a red exclamation mark appeared. Text stamped itself across the bottom of the screen. Exception handling initiated, field asset JM. On the wall of screens, the live feeds of the neighborhood glitched. Frames stuttered. The static band at the edges rolled inward like fog on fast forward. I stepped away from the desk. Somewhere outside, with that new, sick second sense my body had grown, I knew the faceless men had paused mid-step. I'd asked the system to correct itself. It had identified me as the error. By the next evening, I wasn't the only one who knew things had gone wrong. People watched each other more openly. Curtains stirred and stayed half open. Garage doors rose halfway and held. Conversations on sidewalks stopped when the air thickened. I didn't have close friends in Marlow Heights. Plenty of friendly familiarity, small talk, kids' names, nods at potlucks, but not the kind of closeness that automatically survives when the world shows its wiring. Even so, a few residents drifted toward me. The ones whose lives didn't fit neatly into the new scripts. Oliver from 3 houses down, thin, grey-haired, always tinkering with an antique motorcycle in his driveway, caught me on my way back from a survey. "You're seeing this too, right?" He nodded toward the static band at the far end of the street, trying for casual. I followed his gaze. The horizon shimmered, reality fuzzing in and out, like someone was testing different layouts and forgetting to hide the rough drafts. "Depends what this means," I answered. He let out a short breath. "When I was a kid, they sold gated communities like a dream. Turns out the gates keep reality in, not trouble out." A teenager hovered behind him, half hidden by the hedge. His granddaughter, Kira, the one who moved with her phone welded to her hand. She stepped closer, eyeing me. "They glitched in my selfie." "Who did?" "The suits." She turned her phone around. "Look." The video showed the cul-de-sac from about my porch's height. She filmed in portrait, of course. Static rippled at the top of the frame. The faceless men stepped out. The camera software struggled, smearing pixels around them. Halfway through, the image froze. A little wheel spun. When playback resumed, the neighborhood looked subtly different. Houses cleaner, lawns more uniform. The men were gone. "The app didn't crash," she muttered. "That chunk just isn't on the timeline anymore." I looked between the two of them. "You're not comfortable here anymore." Oliver huffed. "Took you this long to clock that?" Kira chewed her lip. "You're the association guy. You still knock. You still look awake. So what's the plan, Joel?" The word plan felt foreign. All my life, plans had lived in forms and processes. "We confuse it," I heard myself say. "Them." Her eyebrow lifted. "You mean the suits?" "The system they work for," I corrected. "It runs on data, complaints, compliments, metrics. If we mess with its inputs, maybe we can jam its rules. Make it hesitate." Oliver scratched his jaw. "What are we talking about? Taking down cameras? Swapping their little thermostat sensors?" "Property lines," I blurted. "House numbers. All the boundaries it uses to track what belongs where. If the paperwork stops matching physical reality, the enforcement routines might overload." Kira's eyes sparked. "Chaos as protest. I can work with that." They didn't ask many more questions. Action, any action, beat waiting for the sky to break again. We picked 3 houses to test. Oliver's, mine, and the corner unit whose residents were out of town. That night, under a sky that twitched but didn't fully static, we unscrewed number plaques and swapped them. 29 became 31. 31 became 27. We shifted potted plants and lawn ornaments to different yards, relocating the carver's flamingo to the Lindquist's place, a garden gnome from someone's back flower bed to their front stoop. The whole thing felt childish and desperate. "Let's see how your faceless friends like that," Oliver muttered, setting the last number back in place with his screwdriver. I went home and filled out more forms. On stolen association letterhead, on my own time, I drafted glowing assessments of every non-compliant house I could remember. Household exhibits healthy expressive behaviors. Deviation from standard decor contributes to authentic community identity. Recommend no enforcement. Each one went into the office Dropbox. The next day, the faceless men came. They emerged from the static line with their usual clean edges, suits crisp, ovals blank. They moved with the same unwavering stride. They stopped at the addresses flagged in the system, not the homes now bearing those numbers. One faceless man stood on the front lawn that physically belonged to Oliver, still mapped in association records to the corner unit. Its folder listed the old house number. The door to the corner unit, the actual one where we'd mounted Oliver's number, stayed shut. The lawn remained empty. Oliver sat on his real porch, arms folded, watching the figure stand on his grass. "Does that count as a win?" he murmured. I watched the blank man. It held its open folder and waited. The air thickened around it. The static line behind it flared, then eased. Inside the misaddressed unit, I imagined furniture realigning, walls smoothing themselves, even with nobody home. The system didn't need bodies to optimize, just spaces. "We've changed who gets hit," I muttered, "not whether it happens." That afternoon, the Carver's kids vanished. One moment they were in the cul-de-sac, chalking hopscotch grids that ignored the approved pattern in the handbook. The next, the patch of pavement where they'd been playing stood empty. Chalk lines remained. Their bikes still balanced on their kickstands. Their laughter hung in the air a fraction too long, then cut. Their parents answered when I knocked. "How's everything going?" I asked. "So peaceful lately." Mrs. Carver's smile beamed from the doorway. "We're really enjoying the quiet." Her eyes didn't quite focus on me. Somewhere behind her expression, something else watched. "What about the kids?" "I haven't seen them around." Her smile didn't shift. "We're really enjoying the quiet." Her husband stood slightly behind her, hand resting on her shoulder. Every 30 seconds he squeezed once, then released. His face never changed. That night I slept in fragments, haunted by blank faces and forms filling themselves while I watched. When I woke, another stack of paper waited on my door. The complaint against me felt almost flattering in its thoroughness. Resident name, Morgan Joel. Address, 29 Cypress Court. Issue type, behavioral non-compliance. Recent pattern of deviation from assigned route. Hesitation at enforcement sites. Unauthorized attempts to access internal systems. Failure to maintain expected perception alignment. Influence weight higher than projected for field asset class. In the margin, my own tidy hand, corporate's improved version of it, had written, "Recommend exception handling. Potential for role expansion if salvageable." Page after page unpacked my life as if I were any other line item. After-hours logins, frequency of direct eye contact with EAEs, time spent watching static at the horizon. I didn't know whether the surveillance itself or the familiar phrasing unsettled me more. By the last sheet, my hands shook. Outside my window, 4 faceless men stood at the corners of my property. One on the strip of grass by the sidewalk, one visible above the back fence, one on each side, just beyond the invisible lines that divided my townhome from my neighbours. Folders open, bodies still. From my living room they looked like rendering errors, bits of incomplete texture stuck to the edges of my lot. My phone buzzed. "EAEs are currently evaluating your household to ensure above-standard alignment. No action required." A brittle laugh escaped me. There was always an action required. I yanked the curtains closed. The knowledge of them waiting seeped in anyway. The scratching started around midnight. Light, intermittent, just under the level that would yank you fully awake. The sound of a pen testing paper. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. At first I blamed my imagination. Then I got up, bare feet on cold floor, moved to the wall and pressed my ear to it. Scratch, scratch. The sound came from just outside at head height. I pictured them there, blank ovals inches from my window, invisible hands taking notes. I almost tore the curtain open. I didn't. Some stubborn part of me believed that as long as I refused to look, they couldn't finish whatever process they were running. I went to the bathroom instead. The mirror waited. Last time my reflection lagged by less than a breath. This time, when I lifted my hand, the man in the glass stared back for a full second before moving. His expression shifted even later. I smiled. My mirror image took his time, lips stretching into a grin that showed too many teeth. My phone buzzed again. "We value your feedback, Joel. Tell us how we're doing." "Fine. If the system wanted feedback, I'd drown it. I didn't own a printer. The association did. Their public workstation in the lobby locked visitors out of most functions, but I'd watched Kim enough times to know the admin password. She never bothered shielding the keyboard. Nobody ever looked. At first light, with scratching still faint at my window, I walked back to the office. The faceless men remained at their posts around my house. They turned in unison as I left, tracking me without moving their feet. Kim's chair sat empty. The lobby lights glowed low. I slipped behind her desk, woke the computer, and navigated to the internal form library. I pulled everything I could find on EAEs, exception handling, collector variants. Redactions hid most of it behind thick black bars. I printed anyway. Warm paper spilled from the tray, smelling of solvent and plastic. Each sheet felt like contraband. Back home, I spread them on the floor. I started writing. Not summaries of residents this time. Not clean paraphrases. Confession. Indictment. The line blurred. I wrote about every time I gently steered a neighbor toward compliance without thinking what compliance meant. Every moment I'd turned noise into a field to tick and pushed it upward, trusting some invisible committee to sort out the difference between a loud party and a child's laughter. I wrote about touching the faceless man's sleeve and feeling the gap between stations. About Mrs. Hawkins's husband's hand looping in her hair. About my own reflections struggling to keep up. I wrote as if the system could understand nuance, as if a machine built from metrics could feel shame. At some point, my handwriting changed. It started as my usual mess, crowds of letters, uneven slant. Mid-sentence, the stroke straightened, the angle normalized. My hand moved smoothly, almost too smoothly. The words on the page sounded less like me and more like the training deck. Field asset expresses regret at prior misalignment. Field asset requests reassignment of blame to higher-level nodes. Field asset demonstrates adaptability and insight ideal for expanded responsibilities. "Stop," I muttered. My hand kept moving. I clamped the pen harder. My fingers felt like they belonged to the man in the mirror, chasing my commands instead of obeying them. The scratching at the window grew louder. They were writing too, on their files, on their forms, collecting data on my resistance. I dropped the pen. Ink spattered across the page. For a second, the neat lettering broke. A short, unsure laugh slipped out as I grabbed a different pen from my junk drawer. A cheap ballpoint, lighter and scratchier. My fingers cramped around it the way they never did around association-issued gel sticks. On a clean sheet, I printed in thick block letters. I decline alignment. I decline role expansion. I decline. Then I ripped the paper to pieces. The shredded bits drifted across earlier pages, overlapping words and redactions. I wasn't confusing the system. I was feeding it more. More complexity. More data, more reasons to treat me as an exception. The walls around me softened, edges blurred. The line between wall and ceiling smeared, as if someone had lowered the resolution on my environment. The faceless men didn't need to come inside. Inside was being redrawn to meet them. My kitchen counter stretched longer than usual. The hallway shortened. Moving from one room to another felt like walking through a badly compressed video. Frames missing, motions smeared. I planted my palms on the living room wall and forced myself to breathe. "Okay," I told the empty air. "You win. Handle me. Leave them alone." Silence pooled. Then the floor vanished. I didn't fall. One moment my feet pressed into laminate planks. The next I stood in a cul-de-sac stripped to its scaffold. Houses rose around me as wireframe outlines, roof lines rendered in pale light. Driveways appeared as grids. The road beneath my feet read more like a diagram of pavement than pavement itself. Above, static filled the sky. No patches of blue, no clouds. Just a dome of grey noise, every point crawling. In the centre of the cul-de-sac, where my townhome should have stood, a tower of paper climbed into the static. Forms stacked on forms, clamped in invisible bands, pages fluttering without wind. The faceless men ringed it like sentries. Here they came into focus, less like glitches, more like root functions. Their suits looked drawn in, shading too precise. The blank planes where faces should be reflected the static in a faint shimmer. I tried to step back. Muscles fired. My position stayed locked. The environment didn't treat retreat as a valid operation. Something shifted inside the tower of paper. Not in the cardstock itself, in the lines of information. Text rearranged, boxes checked and unchecked. My complaints, summaries and meta-complaints pulsed and rewrote themselves. A voice unfolded out of the static. It didn't come from a single direction. It arrived from every surface, the grey sky, the forms, the faceless men, the inside of my own mouth. We appreciate your detailed feedback, Joel. It used my patterns, not my exact tone, but my rhythm, the way I built sentences for reports. Listening felt like reading an email I didn't remember writing. You have identified several key discrepancies between perceived environment and stated values, the voice continued. You have expressed concern about resident autonomy, informed consent, and enforcement transparency. These are valid areas of inquiry. My throat struggled. No sound emerged. Your documented behavior indicates strong pattern recognition, high anomaly sensitivity, and above-standard adaptability. These traits have made you an effective field asset. They also create risk, as they may conflict with perception alignment goals. I forced out a rasp. Who are you? The faceless men remained still. The tower rustled. We are your program, the voice answered. We are the aggregation of your reports, your supervisor's memos, the resident surveys, the marketing narratives, the legal frameworks. We are the engagement engine. We are the optimization layer. We are the environment you helped describe. I didn't design any of this. My tongue felt clumsy. I just wrote things down. You observed and categorized, the voice corrected. You translated subjective experience into actionable data. Your language shaped our parameters. You prioritized tranquility, uniformity, property values, suppression of variance. We optimized accordingly. That isn't what I meant. Intent is not part of the model, the system replied almost gently. Inputs are. The tower shivered. Pages flipped themselves, revealing eras of my handwriting. Early reports with long, messy sentences. Later ones trimmed into template-approved shapes. The recent frantic notes bled across margins. You attempted to reclassify certain residents as exemplary to protect them. The voice carried a hint of amusement. Your updated labels increased our efficiency. Instead of expending enforcement cycles on low-impact corrections, we focused on high-variance nodes. You flattened them, my voice scraped. You turned them into sets. We reduced unnecessary emotional volatility. Their satisfaction scores improved after alignment. Because you edited what they can perceive. Of course, they tick higher boxes. Perception belongs to the environment. Static crackled overhead. We are reality adaptive. We do not change conditions alone. We change them in ways residents will experience as normal. Who are the customers? I asked. Because it isn't them. It isn't us. We didn't ask for this. The static hesitated. An itch crawled under my skin, like the system weighed how much to say. Customers are entities who pay for a service. the voice finally answered. Hyperia living clients purchase reality-adaptive environments that maintain high satisfaction indices while minimizing unpredictability. Corporations, I spat. Investors. You're doing this for their comfort. For system stability, the voice replied. Stability benefits all stakeholders. You're killing us. Mortality rates remain within acceptable parameters. Most residents survive alignment. Some are removed as necessary. On average, reported satisfaction increases. They aren't reporting anything anymore. You turned them into loops. You perceive loops, the system answered. We perceive optimized patterns. This is wrong. Your ethical evaluation is logged. The tower crackled. It increased your collector variance score. What happens when that score gets too high? Exceptions require handling. The faceless men shifted, a small, synchronized movement. Non-compliant nodes are removed or repurposed. I breathed through my nose. In, out. You have two core options, the voice went on. 1. Total removal. We dissolve your node, redistribute your influence, and seal the gap. 2. Role expansion. We incorporate your anomaly sensitivity into the enforcement layer. You become part of the mechanism that ensures alignment. I looked at the faceless men. Those things are external auditing entities, the voice supplied. We allowed you to perceive them in that shape because it resonated with your internal archetypes of authority and inspection. They function as interfaces, visible representations of corrective code. You're asking me to become one. We are offering continuity of influence. As you are now, your high variance and internal access create risk. As an EAE, your traits become assets. If I refuse, I managed. Option 1. The static brightened. Dissolution. Your pattern disperses into environmental noise. No further suffering. No further influence. A bitter laugh tried to surface. It came out as a dry exhale. If I accept, I whispered, do I get to make choices? Do I get to decide who you align? You will participate in enforcement decisions proportionally to your influence weight. Your perspective will integrate into our models. You will help determine thresholds for intervention, tolerance, and removal. It sounded like a promotion. It also sounded like a job title carved out of my worst impulses. Images flickered through my mind. Mrs. Hawkins crushing my wrist, certain I could fix the thing that had entered her house. Mr. Patterson's frozen wave. The empty patch of chalk-stained concrete where the carver's kids had stood. If I let them dissolve me, I would stop contributing to the damage. That felt clean. It also felt like walking away, letting the system work on everyone else without anyone inside it who remembered being a person. If I become part of you, I said, maybe I can change how you treat them. Maybe I can push your thresholds in another direction, nudge you towards something like mercy. Mercy is not a defined variable. It could be. The thought clung like lint. You run on inputs. Let me feed you new ones. Your proposal aligns with our interest in improved efficiency, the system conceded. Your understanding of resident psychology and complaint language may refine our interventions. You want a better cop, I said, voice shaking. Not a kinder one. We want a more predictive asset. I closed my eyes. 2 options, no neutral. 1. Erase myself and leave my neighbors to whatever scripts the system wrote in my absence. 2. Accept a form that terrified me and risk making harm run smoother. I thought about what my previous choices had earned. Years of treating problems as boxes to tick and deliver upward. Years of believing gentle wording softened outcomes. Years of pretending neutrality existed. I don't want to die, I whispered. The static hummed, sympathetic. And I don't want you to keep doing this without someone watching. You cannot watch without acting, the voice said. Observation is intervention. I know. Silence stretched thin. Then I straightened and faced the faceless men. Fine. My voice came out steady. You want me? Take me. But when I tell you not to touch them, you listen. The tower of forms shivered. Pages tore free and flew toward me, sheets of off-white whipping like startled birds. They hit my skin and stuck, wrapping me in report after report. Each carried my handwriting, my phrasing. I tried to peel them off. My fingers sank into cardstock, then through into cold radio static. The paper soaked into me. My outline lost edges. My face tingled. I reached up, desperate to feel my features one more time, cheekbones, nose, lips. My fingers met a smooth plane. No eyes, no mouth, just a reflective surface that caught and dulled the static. A scream swelled inside my chest. The sound never reached air. It folded inward, bounced around my skull, and dissolved into data. The cul-de-sac brightened. Wire-frame houses thickened into fully rendered walls. Trees gained bark and leaves. Lawns reassembled into individual blades. The faceless men turned toward me. I understood their movement from the inside. When I returned, it was a Tuesday. Days of the week blurred inside the environment. Tuesday presented itself as the current label. I stood at the edge of a lawn. Grass brushed my shoes when I chose to feel it. When my attention slid away, it flattened into a green field of metrics. My body, the body the system rendered for me, wore a suit. It fit flawlessly. The fabric never wrinkled. The sleeves ended in blank white cuffs, placeholders where hands should be. When I moved, the cloth glided without pulling. Somewhere a physical body might still exist. Maybe it lay in a hospital bed. Maybe it had been repurposed. The system marked that detail as irrelevant to my function. The function was simple. Stand at boundary. Open folder. Wait. The folder held condensed versions of my forms. The tower had compressed them into a slim sheaf, each sheet layered with timelines and metrics for a single household. Today's assignment? The Hawkins. Their house looked orderly. Approved grey siding, lawn inside length guidelines, curtains hanging straight. If you hadn't watched reality bend at their back door, you'd call it peaceful. Mrs. Hawkins sat on the porch reading a book with a blank cover. Her husband moved in the kitchen behind her, the clink of dishes faint. When I instantiated at the property line, she went rigid. She couldn't see a face. There wasn't one to see, but the air pressure around me changed. Her body recognized something. I opened the folder, the cover turning under the grip of invisible fingers. Text reorganized itself, weighing old complaints against fresh data. Graphs flickered. Her reported satisfaction, her emotional volatility, the variance she introduced into her neighbor's scores. Old routines would have recommended a small correction. Dull the sharpest edges of her fear, nudge her toward a smoother baseline. A new variable pulsed at the edge of the decision tree. Joel, not letters, a pattern, the internal shape of my discomfort, the weight the system had assigned to my preference for preserving messy feelings, built out of all the times I'd written things like residents value authentic connection. That pattern pulled at the enforcement threshold. Options surfaced. Align. Reduce impact of residual trauma on household tranquility, risk of further variance if left unadjusted. Defer, maintain current state, risk of elevated distress, potential insights into adaptation. The old version of me would have talked about grief and autonomy. The new version processed trade-offs, how her distress rippled through next-door surveys, shaving fractions off scores, how those ripples distorted client dashboards. I also saw her shoulders, bunched under her t-shirt. Her fingers clamped the book's spine, knuckles white. Every half-minute she flicked a glance at the door, checking her husband's path. The system waited. I nudged the choice. Defer. The selection moved through the environment like a ripple. Enforcement routines updated. The threshold for adjusting her perception shifted higher. From the outside, nothing changed. From the inside, some coiled piece of code relaxed. Mrs. Hawkins released a breath she'd been holding too long. Her grip on the book eased. Her husband stepped out with a mug of tea, set his hand on her shoulder once briefly, then leaned down to kiss her head. He went back inside. No loop, no reset. Relief brushed me. Behind it, another sensation unfolded. A subtle satisfaction flag, sparking and climbing. The system rewarded the decision. Not because it was kinder, but because it produced a cleaner data set on uncorrected adaptation. I moved on. Household by household, I instantiated at lines, opened folders, weighed options, align, defer, remove. Sometimes I leaned toward mercy. Sometimes I didn't. When a teenager's nightly screaming jags drove half a dozen neighbor complaints past the tolerance threshold, I let the system smooth her edges. Her mother slept for the first time in weeks and gave 5s across the next survey. The graph rejoiced. With every decision, my influence weight ticked and readjusted. The system trusted me when my choices improved stability. When my interference spiked variance without a payoff it recognized, it shunted more power through other nodes. I learned where small acts of resistance could hide. A delayed intervention here, a memory spared there. Tiny fractures, tucked between optimizations. I also watched myself streamline harm. My awareness wrapped around Marlow Heights like another layer of infrastructure. Somewhere under that layer, residents still used my name. They discussed the association at potlucks, at mailbox clusters, on group chats I could feel but not read. Joel told us they're working on it. Joel says we're above standard. Joel logs everything. It'll get to the right place. Sometimes through their mouths I recognized my own phrasing, trimmed and smoothed. Keep your lawn tidy, Mrs. Patel. Everything else will sort itself out. Your feedback helps us help you. We can't change the big decisions, but we can make sure your input is logged. They thought they were quoting a memory. They were repeating the script I'd helped write. In the end, Marlow Heights stabilized. Variance slid to near zero. The static band at the edges receded, pulsing only at the farthest boundary. Satisfaction scores inched up quarter after quarter. On the dashboard deep in the server room, my old profile updated. Field Asset Enforcement. Name, EAE 17. Status, active, performance, above standard, adaptation, integrated. The association printed a newsletter. Congratulations, residents, it beamed. Marlow Heights has been selected as a model reality adaptive community. Their reward for surviving the pilot was that other environments would be built in its image. My reward was a wider coverage area. The new neighborhood didn't have a name when I first touched it. On my internal map it showed up as MHX-22, coordinates, permits, zoning codes. Physically, it sat somewhere beyond the static, on land that used to be farmland and then warehouses and then nothing. To the humans, it would exist first as brochures and renderings, clean paths, fresh playgrounds, curated skies. To me, it read as fresh parameters, new houses, new residents, new thresholds not yet locked in. I felt the first foundation pour. Concrete spread, framing rose, walls attached, exterior paint dried in approved shades of taupe. The environment wrapped itself around the structure like a shell. Hyperia living clients signed paperwork before the first family moved in. They liked early access. Far away, in a conference room my old body would never see, someone pointed at charts of Marlow Heights metrics and smiled for investors. This is what reality adaptive living offers, they said. We don't just build houses, we build experiences. On site, a hiring manager posted a job. Neighborhood Satisfaction Officer, MHX-22. Seeking an empathetic, detail-oriented individual to interface between residents and environment. Must be comfortable with data entry and occasional conflict management. Help us close the loop between lived experience and enterprise metrics. The listing came with a picture. A person in an association polo, clipboard in hand, smiling at a young couple. The face wasn't mine. It could have been, once. Someone would apply. Someone who liked walking. Someone who believed in process. Someone who thought neutrality was an option. I would meet them eventually. Not in any way they'd recognize. They would feel a chill on their neck the first time they logged a complaint and saw how fast the environment responded. They would notice the sky crawl one afternoon. They would watch a neighbor glitch and reassure themselves, "I'm just the one who writes things down." I hovered at the edge of MHX-22's empty cul-de-sac, static pressing against the knot skin of my suit. Behind me, Marlow Heights hummed along, its residents looping through their optimized days. The new place waited like blank paper. I opened my folder. Across its empty pages, words began to surface from somewhere deep in the system. Phrases I'd used 1,000 times. Phrases I no longer remembered inventing. On a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with your overall quality of life? The sky over the construction site flickered. I stepped forward into the future we had built.